And welcome to this week's edition of Conversations. I'm Jeff DeForest, looking very much forward to this one for all the Bleacher Brother Network fans out there, because you can measure an athlete by his accomplishments, but you really measure a man by his humanity, his humility, his civility. And I saw what this guy was all about way back. I was in between decent radio jobs. I was working in what we called radio purgatory. I'm at a Hooters location in Hollywood. I'm sitting there. I'm dying on the air. I can't generate a telephone call. Nothing good is happening on the show. I look over on the left side of the restaurant there, wondering if anybody's there I can talk to. Who do I see but O.J. McDuffie, who I had a reasonable relationship with because I did a lot of coverage of the Miami Dolphins. Of course, he was a big star there. Everybody knows what he accomplished. Favorite target of Dan Marino, one of Don Shula's favorite because it made him forget about Scotch Waities. So I go over to OJ during one of the breaks, and I say, "Hey, Juice, would you mind coming on my show?" Now he's with a bunch of people. He could have easily said, "Hey, listen, Defo, I'm busy. I love you, but what the hell? What are you asking me this now for? I'm trying to have a little lunch." Instead, he gets up right away, comes over, saves my ass, bails me out of a really bad show, sits with me for about a half an hour. And from that day on, I said, that is a real man. So we welcome to the program today, and it's a pleasure to have him on the show. O.J. McDuffie, Dolphin great and a Penn State star, a high school legend in Ohio. O.J., thanks so much for being with us. It's a pleasure to have you on.
Defo, you know you're my man, bro. You've always been my man, so that was definitely no problem. And I know how it feels to be on the radio and looking for looking for a little help sometimes. I've been there. I've needed a lot more help than you've needed because you're a seasoned pro, man. But my amateur hours have proven that I've needed some help on the radio myself.
You've come a long way, since the early beginnings there when you were doing, what was it, Poppin' with O.J. McDuffie?
Often, yeah, with me and Mark Eisenberg, and then I was on with Sid Rosenberg. I mean, of course, that was one of
I
the.
think Sid abandoned you or something. He sandbagged you. I don't remember what happened. He ended up doing okay and landed on his feet. Now that he's a big Trumpster. Great having you on. A lot to discuss here, and we're going to go back into the past and Penn State and the Miami Dolphins. But we have to start with something topical here because I know you're very prolific on social media. And I love all of your posts, and I tend to agree with virtually everything that you say. You were not a big fan of what we witnessed, I don't think, in the Jake Paul Mike Tyson fight, proving once again. I don't know if you've ever thought about making a comeback at this stage of your life. I was thinking you're cruising in on maybe the big 5-0 sometime soon, but Father Time is undefeated. What did you make of that? I mean, did you dig? I'm sure you're a boxing fan in general. A lot of boxing fans would say it's a disgrace. I don't know. Is the benefit that it brought some attention to the sport, or is it negative in the sense that people saw and it was just a circus and a farce? What did you think of that whole thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a little bit of everything there, Defo. I know you're the boxing aficionado. I know you know a lot more about the boxing game than I did. I grew up, watching the Mike Tysons, the Sugar Ray Leonards, and the Vander Holyfields and those fights back in the day when it was for one it was for the most part free other than Mike Tyson. Mike Tyson had all the pay-per-views, but we used to watch a lot of free boxing, a lot of
Sure.
really good free boxing. Thank goodness I had a Netflix account, so I didn't have to subscribe to get that trash that we watched last weekend, last Friday on TV. It was a joke. Obviously, it was a joke. I mean, they know it was a joke. I watched a couple clips. I was watching Mike Tyson's Instagram account, and I was watching him move, and I said, "Man, Mike's going to destroy Jake Paul. He's going to destroy him." And then none of that came into fruition in this fight. I know there were some different things that they had contract wise that he wasn't allowed to do. I saw another clip today where Jake Paul left an open chin where Mike would have destroyed him back in real fights. That chin, you leave a chin open for Mike Tyson, it's over. So it was a joke, man. Of course, they did bring a lot of recognition to the game, but I think it's bad recognition to the game. There's some really good boxers out there, as you know, Defoe, that are out there fighting right now that deserve some recognition. To fight before that, the women were incredible. That's
Yes.
real boxing, man. But for those guys to be the headliners and to have that at that AT&T Stadium in Dallas, and everybody tuning in and Netflix glitching most of the time while it was going on, it was a mess. It was really a mess, and thank goodness there was UFC tonight. And see, their problem is UFC, D4, in my opinion. UFC's become so popular, and it doesn't matter who's fighting. It's going to be one hell of a match. That you need boxing to be really legit, and for that not to be the case, the other Friday night, it was a tough one to watch.
See, I'm old school. I always love boxing. I love the history. I don't think UFC had that. I remember making one of the huge mistakes in my broadcasting career, OJ, and you can relate to this. Sometimes it's the stuff that you don't do that ends up coming back to haunt you. And I had a friend many years ago in the infancy of UFC and MMA and mixed martial arts. And he asked me, he said, "Hey, you want to do a telecast? I got a bout coming up, a series of bouts in Palm Beach. You want to do the television?" I had done some boxing matches for him on TV. And I said, "You know what? I really don't know the terminology. I'm not a big fan of this thing. It looks like two Jewish guys fighting in Brooklyn, where one guy gets the other guy down. They lay on each other for 4 minutes. He gives him a noogie, and then he runs, and that's the end of it." It didn't really excite me that much. And sure enough, it would have been the move of all moves, to be involved in that sport at that time, the way that it took off. But it was good. I mean, the one thing about Jake Paul, I'll give him this: he's been a huge advocate for the women's boxing, and he definitely raised the recognition. Almost like Caitlin Clark coming into the
Right.
WNBA, where nobody gave a shit about the WNBA before this year. Now all of a sudden, people are betting on it, they're analyzing it, they're watching draft shows, and
Right.
debating whether or not she should have been a rookie of the year or on the Olympic team. All of a sudden, people are talking about it. And women's boxing was kind of, I mean, deservedly so for a lot of reasons in the background because it wasn't really competitive for many, many years. And they were trying to force feed it onto a lot of television cards and have people try to enjoy it, even though they really didn't want to see it. And then this came out, and it was fantastic. And Jake Paul's been a big promoter of women's boxing, so I give him credit for that. And if you can pull off a scam like that and make $40 million, OJ McDuffie, I'm all in. I know you weren't a big fan of the election results either, so that was a bit of a tough
Yeah,
blow.
that's a whole different story. Yeah,
What
it's
was a bigger
amazing.
farce, the Jake Paul fight with Tyson or the election this year?
The election was it's tough to imagine that somebody that I mean, obviously he won the elections. Let's get that straight. And me and my people are not storming the Capitol or anything like that. I promise you that. Um, it's like it's just we think about an election. You think that there was somebody that represents our country a little better than this guy does, and it's just the way America is, man. Me and my family, we've come to accept the way America is, and for somebody that vile to win an election, it wasn't as much of a landslide as it originally looked like. Obviously, it was a 50-50 race, and some a percentage point here or there, but at the same point that if that many people would accept somebody so, in my opinion, it's just my opinion, despicable. That's just the way of the country we live in.
It's not just your opinion; it's my opinion too, and the opinion of many. It's hard to believe. It's the old adage about "let's go forward into the past," which is
Correct.
kind of where
Correct.
the country's at. All right, so we have to survive by enjoying the sporting world, and let's get into your background a little bit. This is OJ McDuffie, our special guest on this week's edition of Conversations. Huge high school star out of Marion, Ohio. You go to the Hawkins School. I think you probably still hold every record there. You had your number retired, legendary high school football player. You ran track and field there. You were involved in baseball, big hoop guy also. When did you realize that football was going to be the way to go in terms of pursuing a profession? Was it that you excelled in football much more so than the other sports? Or because I know you play a wicked game of basketball. You used to have what games in your backyard with Scottie Pippen and did MJ ever show up at one of these games?
No, he was scared. He was scared. He was scared, Defoe. Scotty told him about how competitive it was. And now, basketball. Obviously, you know me. My height determined I wasn't going to play basketball.
Yeah.
You know, track and field was just something I was doing really to get away from baseball a little bit, and I enjoyed that. But I did play baseball at Penn State, and one time I was out there in center field, and it was snowing at Penn State. And I was like, you know what? This is not for me. This is March in State College. That's when I decided, all right, well, let me focus on football because I think that'll be, where my bread is buttered. And sure enough, after that, I was just strictly focused on football. I did get drafted by the Angels,
Yes.
that same year, and I debated it, but I knew where my love was. My love was always football. That's for sure.
All right. In Ohio, a high school star, getting all kinds of notoriety. How tough of a call was it to end up at Penn State, and how persistent and how ambitious what was Ohio State in recruiting you?
Yeah, Ohio State was, I talked to them a lot. I mean, I was locked and loaded to go to Ohio State. I really was. Ever since my sophomore year, I had a lot of attention from Ohio State. I had a lot of attention from Michigan. I had a lot of attention from Notre Dame. And Penn State was right there with them. Um, But the thing about Ohio State was the fact that I was going there. I think they kind of assumed that it was that the fact that I lived in Ohio. I think they assumed that I was automatically going to Ohio State. And what they did, the biggest mistake they made was they fired Earl Bruce my senior year. Right after my senior year, they brought in John Cooper, and my mom and I both agreed that he was not somebody that I wanted to play football for. And so
Okay.
that's why it made the decision.
Oh, what was the reason on that?
Well, you know what? For one, he came up to Penn. He came up to my high school in Cleveland, Hawkins School, and was at a basketball game. He didn't know pretty much anything about me, which is crazy because they drove up and they were really up there to look at two guys. There's actually three guys. They're looking at me, Desmond Howard, and Elvis Gerbach. You know, those two went to St. Joe's Academy, which is right there in Cleveland as well. I went to Hawkins. Obviously, those two didn't like me either. They went to Michigan,
Yeah.
when I went to Penn
Right.
State. Just everything about him just rubbed us the wrong way. Didn't like the way he didn't look me in my eyes when he shook my hand, which is amazing to me because I know John Cooper is an honorable man. I know a lot of people I respect him as a coach, but we didn't feel right going to Ohio State and playing for that man. So that was really the reason. Then it came down to Joe Paterno and Lou Holtz. My mom loved Lou Holtz. I love Joe Paterno. And so she finally let me make my own decision in life, and that's why I decided to go to Penn State.
I think even people that hated Penn State loved Joe Paterno. This is prior, obviously, to the scandal with Sandusky. But
Right.
even as a guy that went to Syracuse, and I can relate totally to what you're talking about with the baseball because I played baseball at Syracuse, and one of the injury reports once said that the guy was out with frostbite.
Yeah, right, right.
It was fucking cold. I mean,
Yeah,
there was no way to enjoy playing baseball there. And my first thing, I was a pitcher. I would hit the first guy right in the rib cage with the very first pitch, and
that's
then
that's the way to go. That's a hell of a game plan, Defoe.
everybody backed off the plate. It was like 32 degrees outside with a wind chill factor of -3. So if you got hit by a pitch, then it was not going to be pleasant. And even though I really wasn't all that effective, I managed to get through my share of innings without getting touched up too badly. But yeah, I mean Joe Paterno, Syracuse was a big rival of Penn State when I was there.
Mhm.
Penn State, of course, had much more, going for it at the time, as Syracuse was about to dump into decline. This was at the end of the run of great running backs they had. Zonka left in '68. I was there in '69, and there was a reverence about Penn State. And whatever you thought of them, though, you couldn't help but love this. Kind of literally a father figure, Papa Joe Paterno. He reminded me a lot of Luke Carnesecca and the way he was perceived as the head coach at St. John's in basketball. Tell us a little bit about your initial encounters with Papa Joe and what it was that convinced you that this was the way you wanted to go.
Yeah, I tell you, when Joe came to visit me at Penn State, it was amazing how much time he spent, not with me, but with everybody else. He was so approachable. He signed an autograph for most of my student body classmates and stuff. He did come to some games. He sent Ron Dickerson. Ron Dickerson Senior was the recruiter that was working on to get me to go to Penn State. He's a young black male, good looking guy. My mom, was a single mom, so he sent this good looking brother to come over there and to kind of smooth my mom as well. So he sent him over there first, and got us kind of on track to go to Penn State. And then Joe came in and sealed the deal, man. I just love, what he was talking about, Defo. And the reason I ended up going to Penn State was because on my fifth visit was to UCLA. When I got back from UCLA that Monday morning, I got a 7-page handwritten letter on a spiral notebook paper from Joe Paterno talking about the pros and cons of going to Penn State. Um, and that right there told me that, he sat down and took the time to whatever he had available to write on, he just started writing, and he didn't promise me the world. A lot of these schools you go to, they promise you the world. You're going to be this, you're going to be that, we're going to start you, blah, blah, blah. He didn't promise me that. Promised me I'd graduate, promised me I could play baseball, promised me I'd be playing for some big time football, and all those things were true. He told me we'd play for a national championship. We never got there. Mostly that's probably because of my class. My class of '88 was probably one of the best classes to go through Penn State, and we were a bunch of knuckleheads. We could not get it figured out. That class should have done a lot better than what it did. But I just loved his honesty. And then when I went on my recruiting trip, to all these other schools, Michigan, Ohio State, Notre Dame, UCLA, and of course Penn State, I just felt like those were the kind of guys that I wanted to spend time with when I wasn't playing football, when I wasn't in class. Those guys were great. I went to Notre Dame. I thought, I felt like they didn't want me there. Went to Michigan, I felt the same way. Ohio State, they thought they already had me in the bag. So it just certain things like that are what really propelled me to go to Penn State.
I don't know, young man, Los Angeles State
Too
College.
far away from my mommy. Too far away from my mommy, Defo.
All they would have to do is show you the babes on the quad there, and that would have convinced me to go ahead and sign up with UCLA. Who was coaching back then at UCLA?
Donahue.
Oh,
Jeff.
Terry Donahue. Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
know he had a long run there, very successful.
Yeah,
All right,
yeah.
so you make the move. Papa Joe could be very convincing. Tell us a little bit about the experience once you got there. You mentioned that you were with a crazy bunch of guys. I know one of them. Who were some of the players that you remember hanging out with, and that might have been responsible for the fact that the knucklehead factor weighed in and might have prevented you from winning a national championship?
Well, you don't know any knuckleheads. That's the problem. They didn't make it. You know what I mean? They just
Yeah.
held it back. That's what they ended up doing. But I did play with guys like Tony Sacca, was our quarterback. Troy Drayton was our tight end. Richie Anderson, who played in the league for a long time for the Jets and some work for the Cowboys, was our tailback. A big guy, John Jarak, who played offensive lineman for years. With the Minnesota Vikings. Todd Rucci, whose son now plays for Penn State as a tackle, and his other son is Hayden, is on our practice squad here for the Miami Dolphins as tight end. So we had a bunch of guys that were really, really talented guys and ended up playing in the league. But we could just and see one thing about Joe too was, we had to wait our time a lot of times. We felt like we had a bunch of guys on our team that could play right away, but he let the juniors and seniors play first, just in case they got an opportunity to play at the next level. So us freshmen and sophomores, we had to wait until those guys were either gone or really messing up themselves to get an opportunity. But our team was just stacked, man. We really were. And I think the thing that really derailed us, this, Defo, because you're down here, is the 2 losses to Miami, my junior and senior year.
Yes.
The losses that really, really stopped us from doing really well and probably winning a national championship because UM was winning them back then at that point.
Penn State had natural rivalries. I mean, at one time it was Syracuse. I guess that kind of dissipated over the years because they weren't playing on a regular basis anymore. But Michigan, Ohio State, 2 of the schools that you were recruited by. I guess there was the occasional clash there with Notre Dame as well. But the rivalry with Miami, however brief it was extremely intense. And you have interesting memories of those games because you were telling us about when you came to Miami. I think they made you wear like dark uniforms that day, and it was 107 degrees.
Man, yeah, they tried to get us, Defo. They tried to get us, man. They could have played a night game. It was a primetime, event. This was the game, As a matter of fact, I look at the UM game. It's the same time where Clarence Thomas was getting confirmed for Supreme Court justice, because I looked back at the VHS tape, and they had like a split screen that Saturday. One had the confirmation hearing going, and one had the football game going.
Yes.
And so
this was before he was on the take, Clarence Thomas.
Yeah, exactly right. And so they really could have, played that game at night, and then but they tried to smoke us out, man. They sure as hell did. It was hot, it was steamy, the Orange Bowl was loud. It was just a great atmosphere, and man, we just wilted. We wilted at the end of that thing, man. It was a fun atmosphere though, and I say this to this day, and I know you've heard this before, Defo. I think the games I had against UM are the reason I got drafted by the Dolphins. There were some guys on that UM that they were looking at, but the fact that, me and even Troy Drayton had a great game against UM gave us an opportunity to eventually play for the Miami Dolphins.
And there was a bitter rivalry that was triggered by that '87 Fiesta Bowl game where Vinny threw the 6 picks or whatever it was, and Pete Giftopoulos, a typical, very, emblematic of the Penn State grinded out, big white guy playing middle linebacker, and didn't look like he could move a lick. And he somehow gets in the way of this final potential game-winning pass and picks it off and ruins Jimmy Johnson. Jimmy Johnson's hair was standing up like Don King's. So where did that leave? What kind of feelings did you have when Penn State and Miami met again there when you were at Penn State in the early '90s?
Yeah, because we saw that tape. We saw they call it, they have their own production called The Duel in the Desert. You see Miami coming off the airplane in fatigues. They talk about how rude and how, obnoxious they were, during all the team, when the teams were doing things together.
Yes.
How UM was, I mean, hell, UM had about 40 first-round picks on that team, I think.
Yes.
You
Yeah.
know, they were
And
they were
if you look at that roster, and people talk about the Nebraska team that lost the Orange Bowl to UM in 1983, when Schnellenberger won his first national championship, and you looked at that Nebraska roster, and for a long time that was thought to be the greatest assemblage of college football talent on one team. But if you look at that UM roster from that year, I think Michael Irvin was a scrub on that team.
You're right, you're right. He's an afterthought, right?
I don't even think he was playing. He wasn't even in there. So yeah, they had some great teams, and they persisted in having those kind of teams. So when you were approaching those games as a Penn State squad against the University of Miami, what was the feeling? I mean, did you feel like you were going to be overwhelmed by a better team, or what was the perspective that you guys took into those games?
No, not at all. We felt that these are the games that were going to get us over the top. We prepared heavily for those games. Even game plan wise, especially the first time. First time we played them down in Miami, game plan wise, we didn't show anything in the first couple games because we had some things that we definitely wanted to showcase when we played against Miami. And sure as hell, we went down to Miami. We had a great game going. We threw an interception late. There were a lot of things that happened, but we thought we should have won that football game. Big plays. Lamar Thomas had a big touchdown. High C Copeland had a big play. Kevin Williams had a punt return. They had three explosive plays that ended up being the difference in the football game. Whereas we had to grind it out, and we busted our tails, man, and we lost that game. That was a tough one. We definitely felt like we could go, toe to toe with them. And then again, we play them the following year down, up in Penn State. And the same thing. We thought we were a better team that year. They brought back pretty much the same team, and we had an opportunity to beat them again, and we fell short. So we definitely did not fear UM. We just couldn't beat them, Defoe. Could not beat them.
Very deflating to find out that your heroes have flaws.
Right.
And catastrophic flaws in some cases. And that's the way it turned out with Papa Joe. I mean, I met Papa Joe a couple of times and very briefly exchanged a few pleasantries with the guy. And I thought, wow, what a terrific human being. Was extremely highly regarded by virtually everybody. And then the Sandusky thing comes out, and you're thinking, no, this can't be. Say it ain't so, Joe. What was your initial reaction to that, and has your thought about it changed over the years? So, how would you put that whole thing into perspective, having played for Papa Joe and being so excited to be a part of his program?
Yeah, it was devastating. It really was, man. I still hear about it today. And even though it's been a while since all that occurred, but there was some precedents. There was already something going on right there. Jerry Sandusky had us all fooled. I spent all my summers at Penn State, and we'd spend all our summers, working with the kids from the Second Mile program. We'd be at picnics, we'd be playing kickball, we'd play wiffle ball, we'd do all these different things with these kids. And then when all this came out, I was sitting in my living room watching TV, and then I'm just like a little, on ESPN, a little bottom line goes by, and I was like, no way, there's no way this is even possible, right?
Yeah.
And so, but long story short, once we saw all the information, all the details, how can you deny that this didn't happen? It had to have happened, and we realized that Jerry was actually using us at the same time. He was using us former players, to staying close with some of these people that he was, obviously, to my friends were violating. And, we felt just as bad. We were just as pissed off at Jerry as everybody else in the world should have been. The only problem is that, when you tell the story and people start talking about it, you would think that Joe was the guy that was doing this to kids, and that's the problem. And they do, obviously, put those two together, Joe and Jerry. And Joe himself, talk about in hindsight, he would have done things differently. And hell, he should have done things differently. We all feel that way. And he died feeling that way, unfortunately. And I think that was, other than the cancer that killed him, that was probably one of the things that really probably accelerated, his passing. And so, yeah, Joe made a mistake, a big mistake. He paid the price. His legacy is tarnished for life. And it's tough for us to deal with because we know what a great man Joe was, especially as for us. I've told the stories about, Joe talking about his best team, and I never get the year right, but say it's 1978 or something like that. You look back and that team was like 7-4. Well, how's that the best team? Like 5 of them own their own business, 4 of them are lawyers, 3 are doctors. The graduation rate was this. That's what Joe was all about. If you missed class defo at Syracuse, Joe Paterno would have somebody follow you for 2 weeks, making sure you went to every single class. Every morning we had to be at breakfast at 8 o'clock, because in real life, some guys are going to go play pro football, but most of us are not. So you got to get up and go to work every day. So just some of the things that he instilled is study hall. Study halls for everybody. If you're messed up in school, freshmen had to go to study hall the first year. Sophomores, if you didn't have good grades, you're going to study hall. Juniors and seniors as well. So the things that he stressed, man, it just those are the most important things that I got out of what Joe was talking about. 10 minutes, like say if I got on your show at 4 o'clock, I was late. I should have been on at 3:50. That's Joe Paterno time, we called it back in the day. So yeah, everything's that really had you prepared more for life than it was for anything else.
He seemed to represent so many noble principles. That's why it was such a shock to think that he turned a blind eye in the name of winning or protecting his program, or whatever it was that he felt for Sandusky. You can't imagine that he didn't have more compassion for the kids that were being impacted by this.
Well,
That
yeah, I
was
hear you say about the blind eye.
yeah,
Yeah, I hear what you're saying there, and I think that there are guys that actually spent some time in jail because of this situation. Jerry Sandusky's still in jail. So
yes.
the blind eye is really more the guys that actually got prosecuted and spending time in jail because of their lack of whatever they were supposed to do to protect these kids as well.
Shame. I mean, it's one thing Woody Hayes tries to choke a guy as he's running by, and you realize the guy's finished. But to see Paterno's legacy blow up like that, and the circumstances being as ugly and alarming as they are, well, it was definitely. I mean, it was disappointing for me, and I didn't even know the guy, so I can imagine.
You should have seen it when the day they fired Joe, Kijana Carter and myself. We got on a plane immediately, went to State College. Kijana lives down here as well, in South Florida, and when we got to State College, it's probably about 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock at night, because they fired him that morning. And man, the people, the number of news people across the street from his house, the same house, and that's one thing about Joe too. He's lived in the same house forever. A little small house, right off campus. His numbers in the phone book. Like things like that made him like almost like normal. He walked back and forth from the games because driving was too hectic to get in and out of there. I mean, just some of those things, man, were just amazing, man. But to see you knew the magnitude of everything. We knew it already, but to see the line of TV cameras and big time reporters across the street from his house was just incredible, man.
Sensational story that unfortunately ended up catastrophically, and it brought to light many, really, really frightening things about what was going on in the program at the time. All right, so 92, you're the Fiesta Bowl MVP. People are paying attention, and I got very familiar with you, O.J. McDuffie, before you came to the Miami Dolphins, because doing talk radio here in town, the draft was coming up. There was always speculation. The Dolphins needed a lot of help. We had Danny Boyd, but we weren't winning any championships. And the 93 draft comes along, and everybody is screaming at the local Miami sports talk hosts, you know what we need? We need Kevin Williams.
Yeah.
Fleet wide receiver, an electrifying talent. When the ball was in the air on a kickoff or a punt, you thought there's a pretty good chance here. I mean, better than any odds normally would be that this guy's going to take it to the house. He was that kind of performer. had a lot of those guys through the years.
Yeah.
You were a kick returner, and the Dolphins were desperately searching for one. I didn't realize, I thought Schwades was there the year before you got there, but he had been gone for a couple of years prior. And he was this, it was always his hand was in the air. You thought he was going to ask a question, but he would make a fair catch, even if he had 30 yards of clearance to the nearest potential tackler. And Shula, if he had tablets back then, he would have fired him on the ground, broken something over Don Strock's head, because he was thoroughly frustrated. And everybody was screaming, hey, we need a return guy and somebody that can also help out in the wide receiving corps. And the fans here naturally had this attachment to Kevin Williams, and I think there was a little measure of disappointment. He ended up going in the second round. I didn't realize he was that far behind you. You were, the 25th pick, I think, overall?
Correct.
25th pick, and he went like 46 to the Dallas Cowboys. And there seemed to be, I don't know, how were you received here when you first got here? Because I know there was a lot of that sentiment out there that some of the fans were so enamored with Kevin Williams that maybe they overlooked the fact that we had gotten the better guy.
Yeah, you know what? That I was not received very well, man. I think you might have been one of them, Defo.
No, I was. I really was. I thought, you know what? Get the better wide receiver.
I think, like I said before, I think what helped me a lot with the, the Miami Dolphin fans was they saw me play against UM and they knew that I could play. And I'm telling you, the best thing that happened for me, Defo, was, the first kickoff I had against the Atlanta Falcons in preseason, I took back for a touchdown. Then I had a
That
punt
always helps.
return.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then I had a punt return and in the regular season against the Colts on Sunday night. I had another one against the four touchdowns. I had another one against Pittsburgh Steelers on a Monday night. So I finally got them to appreciate me a little bit more. And once I got past Danny, my biggest hurdle wasn't the fans down here. It was the Pitt guy playing with a Penn State guy. So me and Danny had to get over that. We had to get over that hurdle first.
There was acrimony there.
Yeah, no, zero, man. But seriously though, I think that I understand what we're talking about. KW took a punt back against us, and in that Thanksgiving game, the Leon Lett game. So I understand why they wanted KW down here. I think the thing that really got me over the top with a lot of the fans, and I think was my receiver ability. I know KW is a heck of a receiver, but they needed. We just gotten pretty much rid of Mark Clayton and Mark Duper, and we had Irvin Fryer, Mark Ingram, Tony Martin, but they didn't have anybody working the middle that much. And I don't know. I think that's what really convinced them to draft me instead of KW because I really, I didn't mind going over the middle, making the tough catches. I didn't mind blocking, things that I had to do at Penn State, and then on top of that, return punts and return kicks. So I think that was what solidified my position down here, and I think the fans eventually appreciated it.
How did you originally gain Marino's trust as a receiver? I mean, he was used to Clayton and Duper, and as you mentioned, you had all this speed with Tony Martin on the outside, other guys that could catch the ball out of the backfield during Marino's tenure here as a quarterback, which spanned a lot of years. But what was he here? 17 years, 16 years, something like that. But what was it like initially? I mean, you mentioned kiddingly about the Penn State Pitt thing, but what was it like trying to gain his trust as somebody that he would want to throw to in those situations that mandated somebody making a great catch?
Yeah, absolutely. First, it started off with learning that playbook, man. And you talk about Swady's, but Scott Miller was another guy that did some returns for us as well. Scott Miller taught me, told me to learn every single position on the offense as a wide receiver, and that's one thing that I definitely did. I dug into that playbook and I learned every single position. As a wide receiver on that team, there were five of them really, because sometimes they had a wide receiver coming out of the backfield. So I even learned what they were doing out of the backfield, just so I could make sure. He said, if you do that, you'll dress out every single game. And so over time, I started learning every single position. I started getting some reps, practice. And another thing that Danny wants you to do is he wants you to be where you're supposed to be when you're supposed to be there. That was always important. Be where you're supposed to be when you're supposed to be there. Especially Defo, if you got a hot route coming, if they're bringing two guys and you got to break your route off, you better break their route off because if Danny gets hit, your ass is in trouble. You know what I mean? If you don't get your head around like Linda Blair and get ready for that football, your ass is in trouble, man. So that was 1,000% part of it. And then as we got older and older, and playing with each other, it became the fact that you look around and some guys are sleeping meetings. I was never sleeping meetings. I'm gonna make sure that Danny looks around and say, "Oh, OJ, yep, that's why I'm your guy, Danny. That's why I'm your guy, bro. I'm paying attention. I see what you're talking about. The trust factor, man, more than anything. We trust each other. I trusted he would protect me when I'm running routes in front of big safeties or going across the middle in front of linebackers, and he trusted I'd make the catch or at least make an attempt at the catch and also be where I'm supposed to be, man. And that's how our relationship developed. We had a silent little messaging like with each other where, he'd come out of the huddle and like, maybe OJ. And when maybe he says maybe, there's a good chance I'm getting the ball. So even if I'm backsided with the play, I'm running that route hard as hell. I'm blocking my tail off, and I think that's how, how the relationship developed, man. And sure enough, man, we ended up having one heck of a career together.
The rules have changed. They've gotten more favorable for the wide receivers and the quarterbacks. I would imagine you wouldn't have minded playing under these conditions that are out there today. I know, having seen Dan around town at a few charity events here and there, if you ask him, he said if he was around today, he'd throw for 7,000 yards a season. But with the rules the way they are, and now the emphasis on the passing game and these pick plays and things like that. What I remember best about you, OJ, and I've mentioned this to you before, I remember going down to the sidelines a few times before the end of ball games, and games still being decided. And I would see Marino fire a ball into a crowd of like five people, four of which were Buffalo Bills. and somehow it would end up being a reception for the Dolphins, and there you are making the catch in traffic. I mean, these were things I don't know. Were you accustomed to doing that at Penn State, or was that something that evolved as you were pro? Because you knew that that was the role that you had to fulfill. Because you made any number. It was one thing to see Duper out there flying on a pattern, just on a takeoff. Clayton made a lot of tough catches in traffic, but I don't know that anybody made as many tough catches in traffic during their careers as you did. So, how did you develop that particular skill?
Look, that punt return craziness. As a punt
Okay.
return, you got a little crazy to you. You got to have a little bit of insanity to you. And I think the same thing happens when you're going across the middle. That, and that's what I talked about earlier about the trust that I had with Danny. Danny always found a way to protect me. If he's throwing over the middle, it's not going to be high. It's not going to leave me hanging out there. You see some of these quarterbacks nowadays getting receivers killed. And you're not even allowed to kill receivers anymore like they were back in the day when I played. They'll be low over the middle. There'll be timely things where I got a chance to catch it and get down. But I knew for a fact I either catch it, default and get hit, or I drop it and get hit. So I might as well catch it and get hit. That's the bottom line. So that's just my mentality. And no matter what, I want to make sure that DB knew he didn't hurt me. That didn't hurt. That didn't hurt. Even though it might have, he's not
Yes.
ever is never going to get the impression that he hurt me going over the middle. That's for sure.
What kind of rockets was Marino throwing compared to other guys? I remember a few times getting out and you'd have some pro quarterback throw you a ball, and you realize this is a long way from the sandlots that I was accustomed to. What was it like trying to catch these howitzers from Marino, and how different was his passing velocity and technique from other guys that you played with?
Yeah, I was blessed enough though to come out of college playing with Kerry Collins. Kerry Collins
Okay.
had a 95-mile-an-hour fastball as well. So I was ready for the heat, so to speak. One thing about Danny though was his heat was going to get on you a lot faster than what Kerry's was. Kerry
Yep.
he was able to wait for us to get open and then he'd rip it. Danny would rip it before you even come out of your break. So you like I talk about getting your head around like Linda Blair. That was pivotal in order for you to be able to be successful out there. And so yeah, man, seeing that ball come out, you want that as a receiver. You want the ball on you right now. And that's what Danny did. The ones that guys have trouble with are the ones that are taking a little bit longer to get there. You got to wait, and then you're worried about getting your head knocked off. Danny put that thing on you. You got a chance to get your feet down and make a move and run with it, hopefully, at times. But yeah, I used to love that fastball, man. It's just playing baseball. We're baseball players. You can't hit the fastball. You can't play baseball. If you can't catch it, you can't play football.
Yeah, but I mean, you could break a few fingers very easily if
Sure.
if it didn't hit you
I
just
trust
right.
these things though. These are my money. I trust these big guys right here.
All right. I mean, they had some really good players on these teams. I remember the frustration level was monumental because you kept wondering, what's it going to take to win a championship? Marino goes to the Super Bowl his rookie season, never goes back, which was it's a phenomenon, and people still knock his career today. And they refuse to put him among the greats of the great. And I'm thinking that this guy was the best passing quarterback I've ever seen. With apologies to Peyton Manning and any of the others that have thrown the rock successfully over the years. Joe Montano, he's getting the comparison. I don't know that anybody threw the ball better than Marino, the quick release and all of that notwithstanding. How frustrating was it being part of those squads, though, knowing that you had a lot of talent, but never were able to crack through and get Shula that next Super Bowl title?
Yeah, it was definitely frustrating. Everybody's talked about trying to win one for Danny. Hell, I was trying to win one for myself.
That was,
On the
yeah,
way. And if I get one, then Danny gets one.
sure,
Yeah, it was frustrating, and it's always a matter of especially in football. It's not like we play golf or you're a wrestler or a boxer or UFC guy where it's all about one guy. We can never put it all together, for Danny and vice versa. And we just can never. Our defense was good at one point, offense wasn't. Offense was really good at one time, defense wasn't. We can never put it all together. Even some of the teams, you go back to some of the New England teams where Tom Brady's won championships. How good was their defense? Their defense is underrated. People don't even talk about how good that defense was, but it was so good. Even when Elway won his championship, their defense was good and their run game was good. Elway didn't even have Super Bowls.
sure.
So that's part of the thing about playing football is if everybody's not doing well, if all three phases aren't doing well, then the one guy, the quarterback, is not going to. He can have the greatest numbers in the world if we can't stop anybody. He can have the greatest numbers in the world if we can't run the football at a certain time. So I mean, I felt bad for Danny, and I hear what you're talking about, and the argument that people have for him being amongst the greatest. is win a championship. But when you got a football team, when you got 22 guys and you also got 11 guys on special teams at times, you're not talking about individual sport. So individual sports are a lot easier if you're great to win championships compared to when you're playing a team sport where you're counting on so many other people to do things the right way. And we just couldn't get it right for him.
In the media, we were very happy you were on that team because those Wednesday press conferences with Marino weren't particularly enlightening. You could tell that he wanted nothing to do with answering questions about the situation the team happened to be in at the time. And even though, as we said, there were a lot of really good teams during that period of time and a lot of great players performing for the Miami Dolphins in that era, they weren't able to get over the hump there and win a championship. Don Shula very frustrated by it. Let's talk about those two guys there real quick. If you can give us your characterization of Dan Marino, what would you say about him that people would want to know that maybe they don't, as either a person or a competitor, and then the man himself, Don Shula, what it was like playing for him?
Yeah, Dan gets such a bad rap, man, and I argue with people all the time because they think that Dan is not a nice guy. Dan
Yeah,
is a super nice guy. You know him, Defoe. He's,
very much
he's
so.
super nice guy, and it's hard to beat Dan Marino. It really is, man. You can't
Yes.
really go anywhere. I can go to the store. I can go to Walmart. I can go out and about as much as I want, and nobody's gonna bother me. But for Dan, it's like he goes out and then all of a sudden there's a swarm still around him. Hell, I was at the game this past weekend and Dan still has, they still have armed security around Danny,
Oh wow.
to protect him when he's on on the property, as they should, So Danny's he's so cool and so good with all of us that I have a hard time when people say that Danny's this or Danny's that, because I just know how good he is with every single body, every single person that we hang out with and things like that. And he's a fun guy. He really is. And we've gone on a few trips and hanging out with Danny's it's a hoop, man. It really is. It's a blast, man. And so things like that are what people don't get. Not only was he a great quarterback, and who knows how things have changed later in life with him in terms of how cool he is with people, because you kind of mellow out a little bit. You're more approachable, I think, and I think that's where Danny's at right now. I mean, he's a great player then. He's still a great friend now, and I love the fact that we have the relationship that we do have.
I saw it firsthand. We were doing. We used to do the show with Jim Mandich, Sunday Night Sports Wrap. And Marino would make an annual appearance as a favorite of the Mad Dog, who he had great admiration for and was mutual. And the show was live from 10 to 11 at Channel 33, WBFS, which was a place that no matter how many times you had been there, it was still difficult to find. It was in a little warehouse district, and it was really off the beaten path. I mean, it wasn't like you say, oh, wow, look at that. There's the television station.
Right.
And we're coming out at 11 o'clock after the show. Mandich, I think you're familiar with, always had that cooler full of Heinekens and basically had an open bar at the back of his truck. And so we're coming out to have a couple of beers with the Mad Dog. Marino naturally is going to go. And during the time, it was unannounced that he was going to be on the show. So during the hour that the show was was going live, a crowd probably in excess, close to 1,000 people had assembled, and they were hovering around the gate there, just trying to either get a glimpse or an autograph or a picture of Dan Marino. And this is at 11 o'clock at night on a Sunday night. And I'm thinking, this guy, just like you said, I mean, he can't take a dump without 20 people going in there to try and figure out what he had for lunch. It would be really annoying. So if he blew off one kid in a grocery store one day or whatever, because he didn't feel like signing an autograph or was at a restaurant, didn't want to be bothered, you have to have some level of tolerance for that. But the fans, you know how they go. They would call up the radio show. Oh, I ran into Marino. What a dick.
Yeah, exactly.
I had my crippled son with me, and you're thinking, yeah, okay, there's normally a lot of empathy for that, but the guy can't be as accommodating as people would want him to be in every situation, or he would have zero life whatsoever. All right, I got to know Shula a little bit over the many years that I was covering the Dolphins, and I had a lot of interviews with Shula, and always very cordial contact with Don Shula. He was a very gracious guy for the most part, unless you mentioned Super Bowl III too many times, or brought up that Namath also had a quick release, as did Dan Marino. But how would you characterize your years of playing for the great Don Shula?
Well, I was blessed, obviously. I was blessed, honestly. My best coaches I had in life, started with my Uncle Homer. Then I went to Coach Cliff Walton at Hawkins High School. Then I went to Joe Paterno. Then I get Don Shula, as the head coach. I think if you talk to if you talk to some of the guys that played in the '70s, I got the best version of Don Shula because he wasn't as tough on us as he was on the team from the '70s. How tough he was. Then he was a little not as tough to the guys on the '80s, and then I don't think he was as tough with us in the '90s from what they said. But I thought he was tough as hell. I really thought he was tough. So I can only imagine about what the '70s and '80s guys were going through with Coach Shula. I just love the respect that he got from the players, from the league. I thought he was just an incredible, honorable man. To be that I was blessed to actually play for. I mean, you look at some of the coaches out there. I mean, to get Don Shula to actually give you an opportunity to play in the NFL was really really special to me. And he was kind of the same guy. He and Joe were kind of cut from the same cloth. One thing is Joe Paterno never cursed. He never cursed. Whereas Don Shula, he did a little bit of cursing on the kick. A little different approach to get.
Like I said, mention Super Bowl III.
Yeah. But I just like I said, man, the fact that he trusted in me, held the honor of getting drafted by the Dolphins, and Don Shula had to, pull the string on that, make it happen for me, meant the world to me, and it was just an honor and a pleasure. I remember the day that they were talking about firing him. I'm sitting next to him at the goalpost, in the end zone, and he quickly said to me, "It's amazing how quickly they forget all you've done for an organization." Those were the words he said to me while we're sitting there. I'm a little hurt. My foot is banged up. I know the rumors about Jimmy Johnson was coming in. You notice I didn't mention Jimmy in terms of those great coaches because he's not a great coach to me. He's just, a lucky ass Hall of Famer. But that's just how I feel about him.
Wow, I mean, you brought out a strong theme here with Jimmy because I always thought Jimmy was a great coach, great motivator.
Yeah, he's a great recruiter. You might know the evaluator of talent, but I didn't think he was a very good coach. But that's just me. A lot of defensive guys like him, but I'm not even going to waste our time talking about Jimmy Johnson. But that's it, man. Coach was just a great man, and another guy that you celebrated. We celebrated the hell out of him when we lost him. We celebrated a lot of great birthdays with Coach Shula, and and it's like I said, it was just an honor and privilege to be able to play, for such a great man.
No, it was iconic. I came from L.A. when I first started covering sports here, and Shula was among the first guys that I had a chance to talk to, and I couldn't believe how cool he was. He would hold court. They were practicing at the old St. Thomas facility. I think you managed to miss those days, or did you?
Mini camp there. I got a mini camp there. It was awesome.
What a dump! Yeah, did you think you were in the wrong place? I pulled up there. I had a little MGB. I just come in from California. I drove into that sinkhole that was in the parking lot. I don't know if they ever fixed that. All of a sudden, I'm 6 feet under the ground. And I thought, oh, fuck, I made a wrong turn here. This can't be a practice facility for a professional sports team coached by Don Shula. And then Shula would have lunch with all of the reporters during the preseason practice sessions and just sit down for an hour and shoot the breeze. I mean, within reason, he didn't want to be taking a bunch of controversial questions. And then he really bristled towards the end of his career, as you mentioned, at the notion that the game had passed him by. That became very popular to talk about Chuck Noll in that context, and maybe even Tom Landry. But Shula resented being grouped into that a great deal. And I never forget, I had a little freelance assignment where I was supposed to ask some questions off camera for ESPN. One of my buddies was doing the taping, and so I just had to throw the questions out to Shula. And the first question was, Don, do you believe the game has passed you by? So I had to preface that by saying, "Listen, I had nothing to do with this."
Yeah, you didn't even warm him up, Defoe. You didn't even warm him up a little bit.
I said they're asking me to ask you this question. I really don't. I resent the fact that I have to do this, but I need the money. So, Coach, has the game passed you by? What do you think about that? He answered it as graciously as he possibly could because he was doing me a favor, knowing that I desperately needed the job there, stringing for ESPN. All right, as rivalries go, we talked about that on the college level, but there were definitely rivalries in the pros, and two of the most major ones that I remember, and they always fueled amazing sparks flying type conversations on sports talk shows back when people called in and people really cared about this stuff. Jets and the Bills. So if you can, give us your thoughts on what it was like going against those teams twice a year when you were a member of the Miami Dolphins. We'll start with the Jets, who I would imagine you delight in every loss that's being tagged on them with Aaron Rodgers. That didn't work out too well, the acquisition.
No, thank goodness.
Do you still hate him, OJ, or do you ever?
I hate the Bills. I hate the Pat. I still hate the Colts. They're not in our division anymore.
They don't
You
even
know,
count.
yeah, yeah. You know what? It's one of those things, Defo, where you gotta learn what the teams that you hate when you come into the league.
Okay.
You don't know the rivalries. We talked about the college ones. You know where they're at already. When you get to the league, you got to figure out like, hell, if I don't play for the Dolphins, then if I say I play for uh, the Browns, which I grew up in that one. I knew we hate the Steelers. We don't like the Bengals. You know what I mean? I knew the teams that we didn't like. So when you get to Miami, you got to realize the team that you don't like. And the Jets, of course, were a team that that I learned that we didn't like at all. And then I learned about Buffalo before I learned about the Jets because Buffalo had just beaten the Dolphins in the AFC Championship game at home when Buffalo was on that 4 straight Super Bowl run back in the
Great teams.
early '90s. Yeah,
Teams.
and so I learned about that. But the Jets, I think the Jets became hated by me because all the New Yorkers that were down here talking about the Jets, 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 Jets. And so I just love the fact that we got a chance to play these guys 2 times a year. I think we had a lot of success against them, especially early in my career. Buffalo was always a different animal. We always kind of split with those guys. We beat up on New England my first years. The Colts, we did pretty well against those guys. Hell, Defo, we thought we were going to the playoffs. We went to the playoffs every single year. We're just wondering how far we're going to go. We were winning the AFC East. If it wasn't us or Buffalo, so it was like just the hatred for all those teams because of the history between those two teams was so much fun. When you get a chance to play a team twice a year, every single year, maybe you might get a third time in the playoffs if you're lucky enough to play against a team. That was great football for us. And so the Jets, stinking Jets, are one team that just dealing with those guys and have some history, some great plays, the fake spike play, some of the things that happen in those games that just go down in history are incredible. Even the Patriots, we did an iconic piece on Fish Tank Podcast with Seth Levitt on Dan Marino's return in '94, the 4th and 5 throw, to be a part of things like that. Of course, Buffalo Bills between him and Kelly back and forth. I mean, that stuff was just being a part of all that history was so much fun. And just the hatred was there. The fights, Brian Cox in the tunnel, with Gardner and things like that. Like, that stuff was real. There was a real live hatred for each other. And still to this day, which I love. I see these guys nowadays, D4, and there's a little kumbaya. You're exchanging jerseys and shaking hands and hugging. I was not, Thurman Thomas is one of my best friends right now, but I couldn't stand him when he was playing for Buffalo Bills until he decided to put on aqua and orange. Now we're cool as hell, Otherwise, we wouldn't be friends right now. So that's how deep all this stuff goes when it comes to the Jets and the Buffalo Bills and all the rest of them.
Yeah, it was bitter, and then neither team has been all that great for the last several years. Now I know you're a diehard fan and always have been, and it's great that you're part of the pregame and postgame and analytical factions from the media now, with the work that you do on the radio and on their streaming. And of course, you mentioned the Fish Tank, and that's doing great on CBS4 with Seth Levitt. You guys do a tremendous job, and really, I mean, it's a very cool show. I love the way you guys handle everything very casually, kind of like we're doing here with conversation. So that's great stuff. Do you get a kick? I mean, I don't know how early you go on before the games, but and the Jets haven't been here yet this year for a home game, but. I always tried to count. I always had an over/under in the number of Al Toon jerseys that we would see. But it was great to think that they're so far lost in their history that they're wearing Klecko jerseys in Gastineau, and
so they have to go. They have to go back there. Ken O'Brien's. They got to go way back.
Way back. Yeah. The O'Brien Marino shootout was another classic. All right, how much are you enjoying being a part of the broadcast team? I mentioned that you were a fan for a reason because I used to get a couple of season tickets as compensation for doing some on-field announcing I was doing, and I really enjoyed that because it was great. I always was fascinated by stadium announcers and ring announcers, and so to sit there and hear your voice echoing throughout the stadium as you go, at quarterback, number 13, Dan Murray. And I try to do my best Bob Shepard on that shit. So they gave me a couple of season tickets, and I used to sit in the seats there. But down in the first row, going nuts, virtually going crazy with how many people did you bring to these games, O.J. McDuffie?
We had about 20, 24 season tickets at one point. Yeah,
Yeah,
it was
and you were
crazy.
there, and you were active, and you could have just as easily been Don Denny at that point. I mean, you were going crazy with every play. So how were you able to make the evolution into being an analyst, and how difficult is it to try and be fair about what's going on? Because it hasn't been that favorable, especially this year. I know they're coming off a couple of victories, but how do you handle that dynamic? Where
Yeah, well, default. I think I almost got fired a bunch of times for not being as nice as they want me to be to the
oh,
team.
really? I mean, they're paying
Yeah.
attention.
I
That,
think I
that
say
always
that.
sucks when they're listening. Eh?
Yeah, I say that, man. I gotta keep. I have to keep it real, man. I really
Yeah.
do. It has been tough. I'm just happy that I'm still a part of the organization any way I can. You talk about me going from the field to having front row seats to the games to now being a part of what we do. The alumni association as well as doing the pre and post game show, the podcast. I'm just happy to be a part of the team, man. But it's tough. It really is tough. And the fact that we've won a couple games in a row always helps me in the post game from not getting fired. And that's an
It's
important
a
deal.
lot easier to analyze the victories.
It
That's for sure.
really is. It
Well,
really is.
what do you see though? I mean, we spend a lot of time. Well, we have, Luby, my partner, on the radio for many, many years, and we still do a streaming show in the morning every day. And Luby wants everybody fired. He wants to get rid of McDaniel. Thinks Chris Greer is the biggest stiff he's ever seen. A lot of people are calling for Stephen Ross. I think he's a pretty good owner, actually, the kind of guy that you would want to have owning the team. Although maybe he's listening to the wrong guys. I mean, could you pinpoint a couple of things that might have held his team back, or is it just they're victimized by
Yeah,
bad luck? It can't just be luck that's had them.
yeah, it can't be. It just can't be luck. You're right. It's been a tough. Injuries happen to everybody, as we both know, and part of our problem is I thought that we were going to be better this year in year three with Mike McDaniel, with Tua Tagovailoa, with the same guys on offense that we have. Of course, we're going to be
I
plus.
had him winning the AFC East. I
Yeah,
thought they were going to win it
yeah,
this year. I really did.
yeah, yeah. And that's one of the things that. I'm sorry, real quick here. That's one of the things that I was more disappointed than anything. Then we get hurt. The quarterback position, we've got to go through four quarterbacks. Defense still can't stop anybody. That became an issue for a lot of us on this team. I think that they finally have all the guys out there now, Defo, that they were counting on from the beginning of the year. Of course, we lost Austin Jackson. Ingles been out, but offensively, we've been the same squad that we want. We've got both our defensive ends are still out. Chubb and Phillips. Those are two positions that are hard for us to fill. But there's no excuses. Every team has injuries. Every team loses guys. Hell, San Francisco lost Chris McCaffrey for a long time. I know Debo Samuel's out for a long time. Guys get hurt. How do you fix it? And how do you get better? But here's the thing, this team is. I think they're figuring it out right now, especially offensively. I think they're figuring it out, and I think that coming up, we got a favorable schedule coming up. We've got you talked about the Jets a couple of times. We've got New England coming up here. I'm gonna tell you, the only team San Francisco doesn't scare me as much as they used to scare me. They really don't. Green Bay, they're good. It's gonna be on Thanksgiving night. I think we can handle a Green Bay team. Houston's a team that really scares me. What they did what they did against the Cowboys, that defense is unbelievable under D'Amico Ryan. So we're going to see what happens there. But this team can go on a run. Can they go on a run? That's the key. Can they go on a run and finally be the team that we thought they would be, like you talked about? I thought they'd win the AFC East. I thought they would contend with Buffalo. I really did. I thought this was the year. But hell, that Josh Allen guy is pretty damn good. That guy's pretty good. We've been having to deal with him. So
Swashbuckling throwback to an early Ben Roethlisberger. This guy,
yeah,
he has a bigger arm too. Yeah, and people thought that they lost a lot of talent that they were going to desperately need. Maybe it was a little addition by subtraction. Stephon Diggs seemed to be a bit of an irritant. I don't know that you ever were in the category. I never imagined that you were ever a diva wide receiver, but
they all are. We all are defos
give me the ball. Give me the damn
by
ball.
nature.
It's all Keyshawn Johnson. I probably have a copy of his book somewhere on the shelf there. All right, final thing, OJ. Appreciate you taking the time to be with us. I really couldn't be any happier that you agreed to come on the show. It's always great seeing you and talking to you. And I mentioned, you can judge a man by his humanity, and you do a lot of great things. In addition to all of the different stuff that you do in the community, this Catch 81 Foundation, I just wanted you to touch on that and tell the people what you're doing and how they can get involved with that.
Yeah, so Catch 81 Foundation is kind of morphed into my son's next level, the next chapter foundation right now, whereas my old ass can't do it as much as I used to. So now my kids are taking over, man. And so my son's got this called the Next Chapter TNC is where we're going to start doing a lot of my charitable work with, and we've got a toy drive coming up in December 3rd at the Quarter Deck in Sunrise. And then I think we've got a back to school event coming up the following year. We're just trying to give back to this community. It's been so good to me, Defo. You know how great this place has been to me since day one. For most of the good people, now I think a lot more people appreciate me in this community. So we make sure we give back to it as well with the foundation work.
Are you still bowling? How many 300s you got now? Is it just the one?
Going one, man. It's hard.
What was that like?
300.
Yeah.
Yeah, I quit after that 300 because I didn't want to mess it all up. Now I'm probably
That was
around
the best
180.
game. Get out of here. You had to bowl another. You were literally on a roll. That was great. That's quite a distinction. You and the bus, Jerome
That's
Bettis.
right.
Does Bettis have more than one 300?
Oh yeah, I think he's got double digits for sure.
Awesome. All right. Where can we find you on the air? I know the fish tank is great. I always catch it. It comes on very frequently, actually, on CBS4. It must be like one of their first Phil shows whenever they're looking to put something extra on there. And then it has its regular air time. What, on Saturdays?
Yeah, well, we're doing Saturdays, but we're like I talked about. We drop every Tuesday. We just dropped Larry Shannon today. Larry Shannon was a guy that was compared to Randy Moss coming out of college.
Yeah.
The fast, strong, big. So we drop every Tuesday, still every episode on the Fish Tank. Seth and I, we're on the pregame show and the postgame show for the Dolphins. So we're just just grinding it out, man. Like you, man, you're a hardworking man. We try to do the same thing, brother.
I got to keep working. I didn't spend my money wisely. Let's put it that way.
A lot of us have the same issue.
I'll be going to the grave. But who wouldn't want to do this? It's great. You get to
Right.
meet great people, talk to great people, and it's a heck of a lot of fun. Work with terrific people as well. Oh, OJ, I can't thank you enough. I love you. You know that. Maybe send Toby and the boys over there at Bleacher Brothers Network some of that licky sticky barbecue.
Absolutely.
How's that doing, by the way? I'm a big fan.
It's going pretty good, man. Miss Juliet hits me up all the time. She's actually taking orders for Thanksgiving right now. So if anybody you don't want to do all the work, she'll do it for you.
I'll show up with a bunch of those ribs. OJ, we love you. Thanks so much for being with us. Really appreciate you being this week's guest on Conversations.
You're the best, man. You're the best.
All right. OJ McDuffie, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks so much for being with us. And that's this week's edition of Conversations. I really appreciate you guys tuning in. We'll be joining you on Thursday at 4 o'clock with License to Steal, trying to get a leg up over the weekend. A lot of college and professional football action taking place. So I want to thank Toby for putting this together. OJ, thanks for being with us. And we'll see you next time on the next episode of Conversations.